so here we are back again, talking about the wheel of existence. And there's some new folks here. So I think that the way to begin is to do a screen share, and I'll show everyone the wheel of existence, and I'll do a brief recap, okay, so that we're more or less all on the same page. And then I will move into talking about what I had intended to talk about here. So screen share, and hold on a minute. Here we go. Okay, can everybody see this image of the wheel of life? Thumbs up? Yeah, okay, good. So this is actually, there we go. This is actually the cover of the book that I'm talking about here, The Wheel of Life. And what this describes is a traditional form of our existence as Buddhists understand it. There is a story that this image goes back to the time of the Buddha. I think that's probably an apocryphal story, so I'm not going to repeat it. But basically, the situation we find ourselves in as human beings is we exist within a realm of multiple other types of beings. So here in the Wheel of Life, this segment right here is the segment of human beings. It's a little hard to tell in this image. You know, you can't see the details all that well, so you just take my word for it. This is the realm of human beings. And so we can see each other. This is a material realm. And here is the realm of animals. So we can see animals. That's a material realm. But the other realms on the wheel of existence are not material. Right? So what does not material mean? Not material means beings that have bodies that are made of energy, wind energy, conjoined with consciousness. So they are aware and they have entityness in the sense that they have bodies, but they don't have physical bodies that we can see. So an example of that, let's start on the positive note, is up here, this is heaven. So there are gods, and Buddhists believe in heaven. And you can get to heaven by accumulating positive karma, positive deeds. And this point here in the Wheel of Life shows people who are accumulating white karma, positive karma, and they are ascending. So that means that they will either be reborn as a human being, which is a good thing, or they'll be reborn in the God realm, which is also a good thing. God realm is a very pleasurable place to be in. It's heaven. Everyone knows heaven is wonderful. The problem with being in heaven is you're having so much fun and so much pleasure that you can't practice the Dharma. That's the downside to being in heaven. I have to confess that I would be willing to give up the practice of Dharma for a while to spend some time in heaven. But I'm not a very good Buddhist, obviously, that being the case, but nevertheless, it's true. In some examples of the Wheel of Life, there's another sector, a sixth sector over here, which are what are called demigods or titans, to use the Greek, I think the Greek language. And these are godlike beings, but they're not actually gods, but they want to be gods. So they're busy trying to get into this world. They're unsatisfied and they're trying to get into this world. But this is still a pretty good place to be, all things considered, because if you accumulate negative karmas, you commit negative actions like harming others, killing, stealing, slandering, you know, we can go down the whole list of unpleasant things that people do to each other, do to animals, do to the world. You go down. So what's down? Well, this realm here I don't know if you can see it, these are beings that have fat bellies and skinny necks, right? And they're called hungry ghosts. So some people believe in ghosts. In the West, they're not called hungry ghosts, but if you actually read the literature about ghosts in the West, they're usually ghosts because they got stuck someplace because of some problem. They were attached to something, and that attachment doesn't break. So that's like being a hungry ghost. So this could be considered, in a sense, metaphoric, this image. But from the Buddhist point of view, there really are hungry ghosts. Okay. So I'll come back to the distinction between metaphor and literal reality in a moment. But for the time being, I just want to go through this territory here. Okay. Now here's the real bad news, is down here is a realm called hell. So Buddhists do believe in hell. And they're very creative in the way they describe hell. Presumably somebody has seen it, maybe the Buddha, and there are hot hells and cold hells. So in the Western world, we only know about hot hells. But there are cold hells. Now, we can think about these realms literally or metaphorically. I lived in a Zen monastery for quite a while in California. And California Zen students like to think about all these kinds of things as metaphor, not reality. Rebirth is a metaphor. It's not reality. This is the way many of them thought about things. Well, I think personally, I think that polar, dualistic thinking is pretty limiting. I don't see any reason why things can't be literally true and metaphorically true, both at the same time. It's not like I'm the first person that's thought this. In this book, The Wheel of Life, on page 9, there's a quotation in the introduction, which has been selected by the translator, Jeffrey Hopkins, which I will read. The Indian scholar adept Kamalashila, and you might recognize this name because when we talked about the stages of meditation in my last series of lectures, it was really a book by Kamalashila, a commentary by the Dalai Lama. And Kamalashila was one of the early and important monks who brought Buddhism to Tibet, especially scholarly Buddhism. So the Indian scholar adept Kamalashila, who visited Tibet in the 8th century, says that the sufferings of the 6 realms of beings are to be viewed not just as occurring in those types of rebirth, which is to say literally occurring, but also in human lives, which is to say metaphoric, because we see humans who actually live in these realms. And this is a quotation from Kamalashila. Humans also experience the sufferings of hell beings and so forth. Those who are afflicted here by having their limbs cut off, being impaled, hanged, and so forth by thieves and the like, suffer like hell beings. Those who are, I mean, because that kind of stuff happened back in the 8th century, right? We don't do that to people, do we? Except when we have wars, then we do even nastier stuff to people. Those who are poor and deprived and are pained by hunger and thirst suffer like hungry ghosts. Those in servitude and so forth, whose bodies are controlled by others and who are oppressed, suffer from being struck, bound, and so forth like animals. So even Kamalashila understood that you can see these different realms as a metaphor or a description of what goes on in ordinary human life, or you can see them as being literal places. He could see them as both, right? Because he wasn't trapped by dualistic modes of thinking. Okay, so to me, this is interesting. What does it mean that not that these things, these realms are metaphoric, I mean, we can see them around us, unfortunately. There are a lot of homeless people in Santa Fe that are out on the streets, and they live a really tough life, you know. But literally, so here and now around us, there are ghosts. Here and now around us, there are heavenly beings. Obviously, here and now around us, they're animals. That's not difficult to see. So that's very interesting to contemplate. So how is it that some beings are in one realm and some beings are in another realm? Well, I said earlier, it's because they perform positive or negative deeds, and they accumulate positive or negative karmas. Why do they do that? Well, here in the center, there are a snake, a pig, and a cock, a rooster, right? These represent ignorance, grasping desire, and hateful aversion. These are things we all experience. We experience hate for things, aversion for things. I am not a big fan of spiders, for example. We experience desire for things that is unbalanced, because that's the problem. It's not ordinary desire, it's extreme unbalanced desire. My latest personal experience of extreme unbalanced desire has to do with expensive photographic equipment. And so I have to rein myself in, because believe me, what I like in photographic equipment is really expensive. Nothing wrong with it, but I can't afford it. That makes it unbalanced. I have a friend who likes the same kind of equipment. He's a very successful psychotherapist. He can afford it. So for him, it's not unbalanced. It's quite no big deal. If he wants $1,000 lens for his camera, he can go out and get it. It doesn't have any particular problematic influence on his bank account. And for him, it's not grasping desire. I can't afford it. So for me, when I want it, it becomes grasping desire because I can't afford it. If I wanted a $200 lens, that wouldn't be a problem. Unfortunately, Fuji camera doesn't make $200 lenses, so none of that works out. Okay. Then there's ignorance. Ignorance is the fundamental problem. What is ignorance? Ignorance is not seeing things for what they actually are. So in the case of camera lenses, I'll just continue on with this. For me, in the case of camera lenses, when I think the $1,000 lens that would really be great when I take a trip out to the Vermilion Cliffs in Arizona, and I can photograph these vast expanses, okay? I'm making the assumption that when I get there and try and do the photographic work, that a certain something is going to happen. Why do I have that idea that a certain something is going to happen? Well, for one thing, I could get there in the middle of a sandstorm, or it could be pouring rain, or I could feel rotten and not want to take pictures at all. I mean, I can go on with all the different reasons why all my fantasies about buying this lens are going to have nothing to do with the reality of being in the situation in which I think I need it. Okay, maybe that's a crappy example, I don't know. But you get the general idea that the problem is that we don't really understand what it is we have the desire for. And so the desire becomes excessive. We don't really understand what it is that we dislike, that we hate, that makes us angry. So the emotion is excessive, okay? That's called ignorance. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about ignorance. Some portion of that time this evening, some portion of that time next week, which will be the third and the last session of this group of lectures, but also the month after next, which will be November, I'll be teaching on a book by Lama Zopa, which is called How Things Exist. How Things Exist. And that's all about the difference between how things appear and how they really are, which is ignorance, which is what gets us in this mess in the first place. Okay. So this is the hub that turns the wheel. These three poisons, as they're called, but the root of the poisons is in fact ignorance. Okay. Now there's a mechanism for how we transit these realms. That mechanism is right out here, called the 12 links or 12 limbs of dependent origination. And I'm going to be talking about that next after I finish talking in general about the wheel of life. Okay. It describes how we go through this internal process of being confused or ignorant, because ignorance is a problematic word. I'm going to take a short stop here about, or a short sidebar here. In Sanskrit, what it gets translated into English as ignorance is avidya. It means active, incorrect knowing. It does not mean stupidity. When, as English speakers, we hear ignorance, we think stupid. That's not what's meant by the Buddhists. What's meant by the Buddhists is active, wrong knowing. A in Sanskrit means not. Vidya means to know. It's a kind of knowing. Right? The solution, of course, is the opposite of avidya, which turns out to be wisdom, which is correct knowing. Okay, off the sidebar. So that's what turns the wheel. Last thing to mention about this, the wheel is held by this, sometimes called monster, with big teeth and fangs and claws and all this kind of stuff. Who's the monster that holds the wheel? The monster is death. Why is death holding the wheel? Well, like many things that are metaphoric in this, because of the way the images are used, death is actually change, impermanence. Everything changes, right? And we can see change as death. I mean, when we change in the most ultimate way, we die. Well, I shouldn't say we. When our bodies change in the most ultimate way, our bodies die. It doesn't mean we die. Our bodies die, okay? That's the ultimate change for us, which we all, by the way, fear. But that's really what death represents here in the metaphoric sense. I'm not going to go any farther into this. I talked about it last week, and if you're really interested, you can listen to the recording from last week. Finally, one more thing, and it does not show up well here because of the way Zoom works. This is the Buddha standing here. The Buddha is not on the wheel of existence. He's free. He's liberated. He's enlightened. And what he's doing is he's pointing over here at the moon, which represents the enlightened mind. So this is the way out. Okay. So this is the wheel of existence. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing now. Okay. So before I go on, are there any questions about this? I spent actually a long time reviewing it, but for new folks, it's necessary. Okay. All right. So now I said I would talk about.
Oh, sorry, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, I see your hand raised. I'm sorry. You have to speak up because I don't necessarily notice things, but I hear you.
Okay. Just regarding the God realm, or what you were calling heaven, from my understanding is that because you can't practice the Dharma in that realm, that so you can't continue to work on any negative karmic seeds that still exist for your mind stream.
Mm-hmm.
That once your karma's finished with the God realm, the only direction you can go is backwards, that you can't go forward.
Well, backwards means down into one of the other realms.
Yeah. That's right. In other words, you can't ascend, you can only descend.
because there's no
So it's
place
not
left to go.
exactly a desirable place to go unless you just want to go to party until it's over and then you head back.
I like parties. I've got nothing against parties. Actually, I never go to parties, but I've got nothing against parties.
No, but I mean, in terms of
No,
if you're on a path for an enlightenment, it's not where you want to end up.
no, well, pardon me for throwing the humor in there,
Yeah.
but the wheel of life actually, if you think about it, can seem a little bit grim. So a little bit of humor thrown in here is kind of a good thing, I think. You're absolutely right. I don't know if anybody attending this class has had this experience, but I've known people who I felt like they definitely must have lived in heaven in the life before this one. You know, they bring something with them that's really different. I mean, maybe you don't know, but I've had this experience. I mean, maybe they bring some kind of beauty or innocence or clarity or sweetness, you know, and it just seemed to me like, where did this person come from? You know, where did this person come from? Doesn't seem to me like they came from this place. They must have come from someplace else because they had sort of this extraordinary configuration of qualities. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that explains anything. That was just sort of a feeling I had at the time. So that's my personal experience there. Okay. All right. So I said what I was talking about next was the 12 links or limbs of dependent origination. And as Hopkins says in his introduction to this book, The Wheel of Life, I'm pointing to it over here. The 12 links describe the internal process that creates the external situation. In other words, the 12 links describe what we go through in our internal psychological experiences, which generate actions of body, speech, and mind, whose consequences drive us into certain metaphoric spaces or certain literal spaces. So let me talk about this metaphorically first. Let me talk about anger, because anger is kind of like one of the worst places to get into. I mean, we've all gotten angry, I'm sure. We get angry all the time. We get angry a little bit, like the person that cuts us off in traffic. We get angry a lot, like the spouse that pushes our button, or the boss that demeans us, or the political figure that does something that so infuriates us that we're possessed by this emotion. The sheer experience of the emotion of anger is awful. I mean, I find it awful. I mean, I think some people don't find it awful. I mean, it's probably politically incorrect to say this, but as far as I can see, Donald Trump likes to be angry. He thrives on it. There are people who are like that. I think he's an example of it. But for myself, and I'm going to guess for everybody that's attending tonight or listening to this, anger is an awful feeling. And yet it happens to us all the time. Where does it come from? Why do we have a, quote, predisposition to get angry? Where does that come from? That speaks to the past. Okay, so let's use this example. The boss demeans you, belittles you. You didn't perform properly. You didn't do well. What's wrong with you? Maybe I should fire you. This person over here did a great job. How come you can't do it in the way they did it? I don't know. Has everybody had an experience like that? I've certainly had an experience like that. Why does that bother you? If you yourself feel like, hey, I did a great job, boss is wrong, why does it bother you? I mean, if it's what you did, it must be what you thought was the right thing to do. You probably didn't do it because you thought, I think I'm just going to do a crappy job at work today. You probably went to work and tried to do your best, but it wasn't good enough for this other person. Why does it bother you? What are the roots of that? It's someplace in your own history in the past. For me, it has to do with my family. Maybe that's the way it is with everybody, you know. My father had very high expectations for me. When I didn't meet him, he let me know that I didn't meet those expectations. So that's now a button for me. So if the other father, which is the boss, or the other mother, which is the female boss, says I screwed up, it's like one of my parents saying I screwed up, and I have a big emotional reaction to it. I probably do get angry, but I don't show it because that would be dangerous, right? Okay, so that's where these things come from. They're predispositions that come from the past. And predisposition is a good Buddhist word, right? And those things are in the wheel of life. I'm going to be more explicit in a minute. What does it lead to? Where does anger lead? Aside from the fact that it feels hellacious to be experiencing it, if you express it around somebody, what happens? Not anything good. Do you get in a physical fight with somebody? Could happen. You could get punched in the jaw. That'd be pretty unpleasant. Or you could just crank up the negative energy of the anger with another person. And then the environment becomes pretty nasty and pretty negative. That seems pretty hellacious. If your boss belittles you and you get angry and you tell your boss what you think of your boss, the consequences are probably not going to be too good unless your boss is an extremely enlightened individual. You're probably going to be in the unemployment line or the virtual unemployment line or something like that. You get my point, okay? So expressing these negative things have negative consequences in regards to body, speech, and mind. Experiencing them are negative in themselves, but expressing them are also negative. And so down the line, you end up in a new realm. If you tell your boss what you think of her, him, and it's pretty unpleasant, and you find yourself in the unemployment line, is that like hell? Well, actually, in my experience, yeah, it has been like hell. I really didn't like being in the unemployment line when I was a young guy, you know, and I don't like looking for jobs. That's pretty horrible. Right? So that's kind of metaphorically where I get led into a new realm. Okay. Not so good. All right. But these things are also understood by Buddhists to be literal. So let's look at the specific mechanism that exists that's outlined in the 12 links. And for this, I'm going to do another screen share. Because Jeffrey Hopkins has this very convenient chart. Nope, I need to get rid of this. Pardon me. Let's see, okay, that should get rid of it. Let's open this. Okay, good. Can everyone see this little chart now? Thumbs up. That's a yes. Participants can now see your application. Oh, that's a convenient little message. Okay, this is on page 15 of the book. And as Hopkins points out, this is the way the 12 links of dependent origination are taught in a sutra called the Rice Seedlings Sutra. But it's a very common way of talking about things. Basic problem, as I said, is ignorance. Ignorance leads to certain kinds of actions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But here's what I want to point out before I get into these details. The wheel of life is usually described as articulating what happens over 3 lives. Here, Hopkins calls it life A, life B, and life C. Where we are at the moment is here, let's say, in life B. Okay. And in life B, we got here because of stuff that happened in the past, because Buddhists are big on rebirth, as we know. So this is the previous life, life A. And when we're finished with this life, we're going to go into a future life. We're going to get reborn. And unfortunately, after we get reborn, we're going to age and we're going to die. And it doesn't matter whether we're born as a human being, an animal, a god, a hell being, a hungry ghost, or a titan. We're born, although gods are born differently than humans, and we get old and we die. And then we go into yet a new life. And by the way, it's really tough for gods to die. I remember reading someplace that when they're on the verge of dying, they start to smell bad. And the other gods in heaven don't like things that smell bad. So they start shunning the gods that are smelling bad. Then they're gone. And they're born someplace else. And that's just I don't know what it is. Anyhow, it's a curiosity. Okay. Let's try and break this down just a little bit. And I don't want to get too caught in all the details of this, but there are some things that I want to focus on because they're kind of other places that I want to go. You can focus on the specifics of the 12 links or 12 limbs by reading the book, and you'll get a much better explanation than I can give from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and from Jeffrey Hopkins, who's written the introduction. Point is that our life in this existence begins with consciousness. So what we are is a combination of consciousness and body. Typically in Buddhism is called name and form, or nama rupa. Nama, or name, refers to consciousness, and rupa, form, refers to the body. It also refers to the four skandhas, which are not the consciousness skandha, like the form skandha, the skandha of karmic effects, and so on and so forth. Again, I don't want to go into that because it'll be kind of a side issue. In our existence as consciousness and body, we have sense organs. They're called the sense spheres. Excuse me, of which there's 6. There are the 5 ordinary physical senses that we're all familiar with. Sight, or the eyes, hearing, ears, smelling, nose, tasting, touch, and then the 6th, which is the mind, or consciousness. Okay, in the Buddhist realm, consciousness or mind is like a sense organ, because awareness is receiving or is aware of thoughts, is aware of images that are presented by the eyes, aware of sounds that are presented by the ears. I mean, the Western framework, right? Consciousness isn't really a sense organ. It's viewed as being an active entity of some sort, although very difficult for Westerners to describe what it is. And philosophers call consciousness the difficult problem, quote, the difficult problem, unquote, because they have a hard time with it. And psychologists actually, as it turns out, have a hard time with what it is. Anyway, Buddhists don't have a hard time with it. Consciousness is something that's a phenomenon of moments, sometimes called the mind stream, or the stream of consciousness. And it goes on unceasingly from moment to moment to moment. It depends upon something that is similar to consciousness, just like all phenomena are dependent upon things that are similar to them. Apple trees depend upon apple seeds. Almond trees depend upon almond seeds. Almond seeds do not produce apple trees. Like produces like. This is an old Buddhist principle. And so what is like consciousness? The only thing that's like consciousness is consciousness. And I'm using the term consciousness and mind interchangeably here, right? So only consciousness can produce consciousness. Previous moment of consciousness produces a subsequent moment of consciousness, okay? So the sixth sense in the sense spheres is consciousness. And by the way, the reason that our existence in this life starts with consciousness is because of a previous moment of consciousness in a previous life. That's the connection between former lives and current lives, is consciousness. In some of my lectures, I've talked about this. The term that's often used in Tantra is clear light consciousness or clear light mind. But we don't have to get esoteric. We can just talk about consciousness. And by the way, at the end of this life, the last moment of life is a moment of consciousness also. Here, there's an obscure word used called existence, and that's what leads to the next moment of consciousness, which is a new life. Okay, back to the six sense spheres. So that we're familiar with them, okay? What do sense organs do? They become, with consciousness, they are in contact with or aware of what's going on in the material or mental worlds. So arising out of the senses or the experience of the senses is contact. Well, what happens with contact? We have feelings. We're attracted to things, we're repelled by things, or maybe we feel neutral about things. Okay. I like this neighbor, I dislike that neighbor, I have no feelings at all about the neighbor down the street that I don't even know. This neighbor has loud dogs. I don't feel very good about them. I don't like them. This neighbor has quiet dogs and nice landscaping. I like them. So feelings arise, attraction, repulsion. Okay, maybe those are oversimplified and overly homey examples, but there you have it. But as a result of that comes attachment. I'm really stuck on disliking the loud dogs that my neighbor has. You've heard me say this quite a number of times in my talks, right? That's an attachment. We think of attachment as only being positive, like I'm attached to beautiful things. I'm attached to having dessert with my meals, okay? But there's also attachment which has a negative aspect to it, which is hatred or repulsion or rejection or anger, right? It's really another kind of attachment. And if you think about it, if you're in the midst of having an absolute angry spell with somebody, you're really stuck in that anger. It's very hard to get out of that anger, right? You're attached to it, you're stuck with it, okay? And what that leads to is grasping. I want more of it. I want more quiet from the dogs. I want more chocolate cake, whatever the case may be. This is the point where the problems really occur, attachment and grasping. And I'm going to be reading a passage in this commentary by the Dalai Lama about this and how to cut the cycle at this particular point. Because this, in fact, is the point at which you can cut the cycle, you can break out of the wheel of existence and get off, like the Buddha, who in fact did that. That's how you get off. You deal with the problems at this point. So how do you do that? It has to do with developing wisdom, with understanding what's really going on. Okay. So life goes on. We're constantly in contact with experiences in the physical and the mental world. We have feelings about them. We're attracted, we're repelled by them, right? As a result, we get attached to things or repelled by things. So it would be more convenient if the eighth limb was attachment / repulsion. It's just not written out that way, but it is what's meant. And as a result, we grasp onto things, right? And as a result of grasping things, We're stuck. Remember the old, what did we don't remember? There's an old Southern story about the tar baby. Anyone know that story? No one knows that story. Well, never mind then. Forget about the tar baby story. It's probably a little bit racist anyway, so just as well that I don't repeat it. So we get stuck onto things. And that is what creates the nature of our existence. But here, existence has a more particular meaning. And its meaning is basically the last kind of thoughts we have, or the last attitudes we have, or frame of mind we have, or emotions we're feeling just before we die. Those feelings, which arise out of a whole karma history of our lives, are called, they're the karmas. They are the imprints on our consciousness that have been created by a lifetime of attachment and grasping. Because when we are attached to something, when we grasp on something, there's an action that's associated with it. And that action leaves an imprint on our consciousness. In modern language, it's simply called a habit, right? If you're in the habit of having something sweet like ice cream or cake or something like that with every meal, you expect to have that with every meal. You have the habit of having sweets with every meal. That's a habit, and it actually becomes very difficult to break, right? Because that habit is, in the Buddhist language, an imprint on your consciousness, on the stream of your consciousness, which is really what's traveling over time, okay? And that's the problem. It's the imprint on the stream of consciousness. And depending upon what imprint on the stream of consciousness is active just before you die, that's going to determine the nature of your next birth. So that's both good news and bad news, right? Let me talk about the bad news first, and then I'll talk about the good news. The bad news is that if at the time of your dying, you're full of negative thoughts, hostile thoughts, gobs of fear, gobs of animosity, loads of regret about the nature of your life, all that stuff will have an impact on what your next life is going to be. So conceivably, it's not necessarily the case, but conceivably, if you end your life and the last moments of your life is regret for all the stuff you didn't get, sounds like you may end up as a hungry ghost. It turns out that there's so many gobs of karma from so many lives, but what's actually going to happen in the next life, right, could be the consequences of God knows what in the past. So if your mind is completely uncontrolled at the time you're dying, it doesn't necessarily 100% mean that you're going to end up in some awful realm. You could be dying with fear or regret, and you could still end up in heaven. These are not 100% the case of how things are going to work out. But it's described this way for simplicity's sake, I think. Okay. So your mind stream now goes into a new birth, and it carries with it the imprints of all the accumulated actions of all the past, that everything you've done in all your former lives. Those are imprinted on the mind stream. So from the Buddhist point of view, that's kind of the bad news, right? Or it's the good news. Why is it the good news? Because you can choose to live your life differently, and you can practice differently, and you can have a different frame of mind at the end. instead of practicing selfishness and animosity, and I'm going to get mine and to hell with you can practice compassion. We're all in the same boat together. Let's take care of each other. We're all part of the human family. Let's treat each other as family. We all share the same existence. We all share the same planet. Let's take care of it. Because if I take care of the planet and you take care of the planet, it's better for both of us. And if we all take care of the planet, it's better for all of us. That's, as far as I can see, pretty much common sense. If I'm going to rip off as much as I can get and to hell with whatever else is left, I still have to deal with whatever else is left, right? It doesn't like go away. It's still there, okay? That's irrational. That's illogical. But it's not the case that people are necessarily rational or logical or compassionate or whatever. So that's why all these different realms exist, because all this different stuff is going on. But the good news is that we can do positive things, and that will have positive consequences. It's the law of cause and effect. It's actually not particularly esoteric or difficult, right? If you do positive things happen. You have a positive frame of mind. I mean, if you have a positive attitude towards what's going on in your life, even if your life isn't 100% wonderful, your mind might be in a very great place. It might be just fine. I mean, the Dalai Lama talks about this a lot. And one of the things that he observed when he first started coming to the Western world was he said, people in Asia don't have very much, at least back then. I mean, Asia's changed a lot, right? But people in India are often really poor, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily unhappy, because I know lots of happy people who are poor. Having stuff doesn't necessarily make you happy. And he said, now that I've been here, I can meet lots of people who have lots of stuff, and they're really unhappy. Having all that stuff didn't make them happy. What makes you happy is the frame of mind. You can have lots of stuff and be happy, and you can have lots of stuff and be unhappy. You can be rich and happy, and you can be rich and miserable. I know, doesn't sound likely, right? I lay this on my students at the university. You can be rich and miserable, and they look at me like, what is he talking about? But they're really young. They don't get it. You can be rich and miserable. I know miserable rich people. Okay. I know happy rich people too. You can also be poor and happy. It's all a matter of your mind. Now, you can be overly poor and miserable because you don't have enough to eat. That's like Kamala Shila talking about the hungry ghosts. I mean, things can go too far, and then it's a problem. You can be too poor, not get enough to eat, not have shelter, and be very miserable. No question about it. Or you can be poor, have shelter, have enough to eat, but nothing special going on, and you can be perfectly happy. I know lots of monks that have very little, and they're really very happy people. They don't need lots. That's the way they've chosen to live their life, okay? So I don't want to belabor this point, but I think you get it, all right? Again, what sets it all in motion? Ignorance, which leads to certain kinds of action, leaves imprints on consciousness, which leads to certain kinds of births. Okay, so I won't go into what all this technical stuff is about projecting causes, projected causes, whatnot. Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share. Okay, again, let me take a moment to stop and ask if there are any questions about this. Nope. Okay. So, key point is about how we act in our bodies, with speech, and in our minds, the imprints on our mind stream. So what do we do about it? So His Holiness in this book has a lot to say about that. And I'm going to read a long passage where he says what to do about the problem, because that's the most important thing. What do we do about the problem? I mean, I think for most people, it's perfect. They just go through their lives. Everything is perfectly okay. They don't have expectations for things to be more than they are. Suffering comes, it's suffering. Joy comes, it's joy. That's fine for some people, maybe for most people, you know. I remember one teacher I knew said, you know, it might be okay if you were a carpenter and, you know, you worked hard 5 days a week, and on Saturdays you sat around and, you know, watched football and had a couple beers, and that was your life, and that was okay. But that's not who we are sitting here listening to these teachings, because we have a different set of expectations and our minds are different. And we're not okay with that. And by the way, you know, as he would have pointed out, the carpenter who works 5 days a week and has a beer and watches football on Saturday is going to have plenty of misery in her, his life. You know, that's unavoidable. It's just the way things are. So why not do something about it? And drinking a can of beer is not going to solve the problem. We all know about addictions, and we know about intoxication. We know they don't solve the problem. That's not news to any of us. It's really not news to me. Okay, let me read this lengthy passage. So I'm going to read the whole thing, and then I'm going to make some comments on it and to where it goes. So bear with me. In order to create peace of mind, the question of whether the afflictive emotions can be overcome is crucial. At this point, one is training to overcome the afflictive emotions, and to do this, it is necessary to destroy their root, which is the ignorance that conceives inherent existence. To do this, it is necessary to generate a reasoning consciousness that perceives objects in exactly the opposite way to how we would perceive them with ignorance. Only such a consciousness can serve as an antidote to afflictive emotions. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this is on page 82 and 83. Ignorance conceives phenomena to exist in and of themselves, whereas in fact objects do not exist this way. To overcome this ignorance, it is necessary to refute with reasoning its conceived object, inherent existence. We must realize that objects do not exist inherently in and of themselves. Excuse me for a moment. In order to develop a realization of emptiness capable of removing this ignorance, one cannot merely generate a reasoned inferential consciousness that realizes emptiness. In addition, one must bring this inferential understanding to the level of direct, non-conceptual perception of the emptiness of inherent existence. In order to accomplish this, it is necessary to have the assistance of deep concentration, over which it is possible to develop samadhi, or meditative stabilization, a union of calm abiding and special insight. Thus it is said that in order to generate the wisdom consciousness constituted by special insight into emptiness, it is necessary first to generate a calm abiding of the mind, a tranquilization and focusing of consciousness. It is advantageous to develop the mind's ability to remain on its object of observation in an alert and clear manner, and by developing vivid one-pointedness of mind, the mind gradually becomes more sharp, more alert, and more able. These are reasons for the detailed presentation of how to achieve meditative stabilization. Now, hold on a second. Pardon me. I talked extensively about developing meditative stabilization in the last set of talks I did on stages of meditation. His Holiness's commentary on the teachings of Kamala Shila. And how many of us are going to be able to get calm abiding or one-pointed concentration? How many of us are going to be able to develop that? We can practice, but will we gain it? Well, I keep practicing, and I'm now 76, and I'm sorry, I don't have calm abiding. But I keep working on it. Why do I keep working on it? Next paragraph, His Holiness says something very interesting, which I've never found him to say anyplace else. So I'm going to read it again, the whole thing. That's the whole paragraph, that is. Then I'll go back to the beginning and I'll try and do an explication of what I just read. Someone who wants to achieve mental calm abiding cannot live as we do now, but should stay in an isolated place where continual practice can be cultivated over a long period of time. Well, are we going to become hermits, nuns, monks? Don't think so. So that suggests we're not going to really gain calm abiding, are we? But in addition, if one works at achieving calm abiding in connection with tantric practices, it is said to be easier. Something that's easier. Meditation on tantric deities helps promote calm abiding. I'll talk about that next week. And I've talked about that a lot in the past. Still, for those not capable or ready for such intense practice, that probably means all of us, it is helpful to rise early in the morning and immediately use the mind while it is still clear to investigate the nature or entity of mind itself without thinking about other topics. This practice helps keep the mind alert, thereby helping one throughout the rest of the day. What does he mean by helping one throughout the rest of the day? Means helping you avoid getting angry and therefore fired by the boss or in a tiff with your spouse or whatever the case may be. Getting up early in the morning, okay, getting up in the morning before you go to work or whatever else you have to do, may not be all that early, all right? And doing meditation on the nature of mind will promote a frame of mind which is wholesome and helps with all the problems. And by the way, if you keep practicing every day continuously, it's like anything else. The more you practice it, the better you get at it, and the more you're able to do it successfully. So the more you practice calm abiding by meditating on whatever, here he says the nature of the mind, the more you develop the skill of doing that. And the more your mind is pacified for the rest of the day. I mean, I know the difference between having a good, successful meditation in the morning and not, in the way it influences the rest of my day. I mean, I can see it. It's not really unusual. It's like doing any kind of exercise. If you get up in the morning and you do yoga or you take a walk or something like that, you feel perkier throughout the rest of the day. The day doesn't drag on in the same way because your body feels better. At least my body feels better. I'm assuming everybody's bodies feels better. Never mind. I'm assuming it works for everybody. Okay, I couldn't get that out. Here he does say by meditating on the nature of mind. He doesn't say what he means by that, unfortunately, because it could mean a number of things. It could be meditating on your own consciousness, like watching your consciousness. It could be meditating on a deity like Avalokiteshvara or Manjushri, because they are of the nature of your mind. They're not anything else but the nature of your mind. So it could mean a lot of different things. So I would leave that up to anybody to do what they want to do and follow his guidance here. Okay, but let me go back to the beginning and try and take this apart bit by bit to to explicate it and hopefully make it a little clearer, because this is the way out of grasping attachment. This is what breaks the cycle. This is what prevents the accumulation of negative imprints on the mind stream. And by the way, this is also what creates positive imprints on the mind stream, which create positive outcomes in this life and in the future. So let me go back to the beginning. In order to create peace of mind, the question of whether the afflictive emotions can be overcome is crucial. Here where he says afflictive emotions, he's just talking about things like anger, other overly intense emotions that create problems for us. Grasping desire. I'm sorry, that dinner's not complete unless you give me chocolate cake. What? No cake? What's going on here? Okay, that's an afflictive emotion. At this point, one is training to overcome the afflictive emotions. That's us. That's what we're dealing with. We're trying to overcome the afflictive emotions. And to do this, it is necessary to destroy their root. What's the root of the afflictive emotions? Remember, ignorance, avidya, which is the ignorance that conceives inherent existence. Okay, what means inherent existence? This term comes up over and over again. Inherent existence means perceiving things to be more than what they are, perceiving things to have the characteristics in themselves that we project on them. Okay, I'll go back to chocolate cake. Okay. Perceiving chocolate cake to make me happy is to project onto chocolate cake something that's not actually in chocolate cake. The happiness is in me, it's not in the cake. I can be perfectly happy without chocolate cake. In fact, in my case, I'm much happier without chocolate cake because it doesn't agree with me. So it's a very interesting example to use. I like it. I like chocolate. It doesn't agree with me, right? So for sure, right? So for sure, we have ignorance at work here when I want to sit down and have some chocolate, because I have to actively not remember that it makes me ill. And it tastes wonderful when I eat it, and then I get sick. And I forget it over and over again. We have wonderful chocolate in the house, and I should never eat it. And I do. Ignorance, avidya, active misknowing. Okay. What does it mean to say conceives of inherent existence? It means to perceive that something is in the existence of the presumed thing that is not there, is coming from me. It's not there. There are other meanings to inherent existence. That's one. Another is that the thing is an entity which is independent of its parts. Okay, go back to chocolate. Chocolate is just chocolate. It's wonderful, right? Okay, what's in chocolate? Cocoa, which is full of caffeine, which doesn't agree with me. Sugar, which is in chocolate, which also doesn't agree with me. Soy lecithin, which is in chocolate, which does agree with me. Bad for my wife, though, because she's allergic to soy products. You can go on and on. You don't see that stuff when you look at the chocolate. You just see chocolate. You don't see sugar. You don't see soy lecithin. You don't see caffeine, right? But it's there, but you don't see it, all right? What you see is the whole, and you think that that's all there is. That's the mistake, okay? There are other kinds of inherent existence. I won't go into it right now. And considering what the time is, I won't be going into it tonight. I'll go into it next week. Okay, where were we? Have to destroy the root, which is the ignorance that conceives inherent existence. To do this, it is necessary to generate a reasoning consciousness that perceives objects in exactly the opposite way to how we would perceive them with ignorance. All right, I'll go back to the chocolate. I perceive the chocolate as something wonderful. That's ignorance. A reasoning consciousness looks at the chocolate and remembers that every time I eat it, I get sick. That's seeing it for what it is. That's a reasoning consciousness. But it's, oh, I have the thought. The chocolate still looks good, but there's this thought in my mind that it isn't good for me. There's this discrepancy now between how it looks and how I think about it. That's the reasoning consciousness. Okay. The reasoning consciousness perceives objects in exactly the opposite way to how we would perceive them with ignorance. In other words, I look at the chocolate and I know it's bad for me. I still like it. I still want to eat it, but I know it's bad for me. Only such a consciousness can serve as an antidote to afflictive emotions, but he goes on. Ignorance conceives phenomena to exist in and of themselves, whereas in fact they do not exist this way. To overcome this ignorance, it is necessary to repeat with reasoning its conceived object inherent existence. Okay, chocolate's bad for me, I know it, I think about it. We must realize that objects do not exist inherently in and of themselves. Now he goes on. In order to develop a realization of emptiness capable of removing this ignorance, one cannot merely generate a reasoned inferential consciousness that realizes emptiness. It's not enough to know or remember that chocolate's bad for me. In addition, one must bring this inferential reasoning, this inferential understanding to the direct, in addition, one must bring this inferential understanding to the level of direct, non-conceptual perception of the emptiness of inherent existence. In other words, you have to have a direct experience of it. Now, I'm not at the place where I can have a direct experience of consciousness as being bad for me. I have to eat it and get sick. But I used to smoke cigarettes. I quit smoking cigarettes quite some time ago. To stop smoking cigarettes was a complicated process. It involved reasoning and quite a number of other things. But now, if I'm near anybody smoking a cigarette, it absolutely repels me. It's repulsive. I get sick. I can't stand to look at it. I can't stand the smell of it. And if I'm near anybody that's smoking a cigarette, I have to go away from them. That's the direct, non-conceptual experience of the negative, unhealthy quality of tobacco. Okay. Take that as a metaphor for what you want to try and gain with your understanding of emptiness. You want to go from an intellectual understanding of it, this is why we study, to a reasoned understanding of it, like, okay, now I kind of understand emptiness, to a meditative experience of being able to perceive the emptiness of phenomena directly. That is what most deeply cuts the root of ignorance. That's what His Holiness is saying. And that's why we practice. That's why we want to try and gain this understanding. We want a direct experience. It's a challenge. But it's not all or nothing. I mean, it might seem like all or nothing, like you're walking through a door. I'm over here and I don't get it. I can't see it. And then I walk through the door and I get it. In Zen, they do talk about that. They talk about Satori. Before Satori, you don't get it. After Satori, you get it. Before Satori, you chop wood and carry water. After Satori, you chop wood and carry water. However, wood chopping and water carrying is not the same experience after Satori, because you see it differently. In the Tibetan tradition, it's understood more as a gradual process rather than an instantaneous boom, you're through the door into someplace else. Not that that can't happen. In fact, they say it does happen after a considerable amount of practice. So I've been studying emptiness, or about emptiness, since the 70s, when I first started studying Nagarjuna in the 1970s. So my understanding constantly increases. My intellectual understanding constantly increases. And when I sit down to meditate, over the years, I have a clearer and clearer direct sense of the empty nature of phenomena. I can't say that I see things directly for what they are. I'm not on the path of seeing. That would be, in the Tibetan sense, that would be describing that place or that state of mind where you really directly see things as being, seeing their empty nature and what that means, which I'm not going to go into right now. But that doesn't mean you can't get more and understand more and develop more and more wisdom. So I don't take wisdom to be an all or nothing. If it was all or nothing, it'd be a problem, right? We can become wiser. We can recognize that chocolate's not good for us if it's not good. That might be good for you, I don't know. But it's not good for me. So I can recognize that it's not good for me. And I can make the decision, I'm not going to eat it because I know it's not good for me. And sometimes I'll fail and I'll eat it. And sometimes I won't. And I'll say, I know it's not good for me. I won't. That's how I quit smoking cigarettes. Pick up a cigarette. This isn't good for me. Why do I want to smoke this? I want to smoke it anyway. So I do. But the more often I made the decision not to, the more I developed the habit pattern of not smoking and being repelled. And so that's how I quit. And now I have the direct experience of how awful cigarettes are. There is no way in the world I'm ever going to smoke another cigarette. It is simply not ever going to happen, right? Because I experience it for what it truly is. Okay. So wisdom is something that can gradually develop. And because it can gradually develop, we can gradually stop creating the negative habit patterns. And we can gradually create positive habit patterns. What are the positive habit patterns? Well, the 6 paramitas, for example, the 6 perfections. Being friendly to people, that's a positive thing we can all do. That lays down positive habit patterns, making some effort to not get angry. Maybe more of a challenge. My current challenge is not telling the drivers in Santa Fe what I think of them. My wife would like me to do more and more of it because she's often sitting next to me when I have some comment about something going on here. So I'm working on it gradually. I don't quite say the things that I always feel like I want to say. Maybe sometime I'll stop thinking them too. Okay, it's gradual. So, all right, back to His Holiness. In order to accomplish this, which is the direct non-conceptual experience, in order to accomplish this, it is necessary to have the assistance of deep concentration with which it's possible to develop samadhi or meditative stabilization by the union of calm abiding and special insight. So if you want to know what this is about, you can go back to the lectures that I did the month before last, stages of meditation. Okay, I think that's enough on that quote. I don't have to try and talk about the rest of it because you kind of get it from my somewhat homey examples. Now, there's one other thing His Holiness says that I want to emphasize, because here we're talking about developing the wisdom of emptiness, right, to cut through the negative habit patterns. But he also talks about the accumulation of positive habit patterns. So let me read you a short passage of what he says about this. We've been talking about destroying the negative predispositions. He says, the question of how to destroy these predisposing the question is how to destroy these predisposing tendencies. That's what we've been talking about. The actual weapon is the same, the wisdom that understands emptiness. I'm sorry, I'm on page 95. The wisdom that understands emptiness. But to overcome such latencies, predispositions, the powerful backing of great merit is needed. The technique for constantly accumulating great merit is unusual altruism. Until now, the main concern has been with this one being, oneself. In altruistic practice, the concern is with all sentient beings. So what is he saying here? If you hang around Tibetan Buddhists, if you hang around Thupten Norbu Lang, you can hear this a lot. Bodhicitta, altruism, universal compassion. What His Holiness is saying here is something that in the past he sometimes called wise selfishness, which is to say, if you start developing a consideration for others, if you start caring for others, you start accumulating positive habit patterns. That's what's referred to here as merit, positive energy, positive habit patterns. And that strengthens the development of wisdom. That actually these two go hand in hand. It powers the wisdom. Wisdom powers the altruism. Altruism powers the wisdom. How does that work? Wisdom shows you things as they actually are, which is your true relationship with others. And by enacting your true relationship with others, whether you're wise or not, you're reinforcing your ability to cultivate more wisdom because you're enacting the truth. Now, that may be hard to do because we're used to being selfish, but we can practice it. We can practice ways of taking care of others, and we can see the truth of the matter. And then that reinforces the development of wisdom. And that cuts through the grasping attachment that is what is responsible for being pinned to the wheel of life, the wheel of existence, so that we can get off of it completely, which is where the Buddha is. And in the short term, even if we can't get off of it, we accumulate enough merit, you can get a nice vacation in heaven. You can party for a while. Sounds good to me. Okay, so I think that that's it for this evening for me. But if there are any questions, I'll take them. And then if not, that will be it until next week. And just sort of a preview, month after next, which is November. Yeah, that's amazing, which is November. I'll be teaching on this book, How Things Exist. Yes, How Things Exist by Lamas, which is an intensive investigation of this question of the difference between appearance and reality, the empty nature of phenomena, which, by the way, I got to close by saying this, does not mean that phenomena don't exist. It means they exist differently than the way they appear. They're emptied of projections. That's very important to say that. And somebody has posted something here. Jai says, oh yeah, Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive has a free download of the book. So when the time comes, if you want it, no problem. It's easy to find. Jai has put a link up here, and perhaps you can see the link. But if you simply Google How Things Exist, it'll take you to the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive electronic copy of that book. So you can make a donation to download it. I don't think there are any hard copies available anymore, but you can get a PDF and print it off or read it online, whatever. But that's a preview of coming attractions. Okay. I don't see any questions. So then thank you for coming and good night. And I'll see you next week.